Good evening. I'd like to call to order the May 21st Joint Town Council Parking Authority Town of Los Gatos meeting. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Good evening. Councilmember Stephen Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Krasinski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Barbara Spector.
Here.
Mayor Steve Rice.
Here. At each of our council meetings, we have a young leader in our community lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. This evening, we have with us Katie McEnroe, a fourth grader from Van Meter Elementary School. Last fall, she was the student council treasurer. She's the student council class representative for 2 terms. Her favorite subjects are social studies, science, writing, and art. Her sports include skiing, volleyball, horseback riding. I didn't hear any cheers. Okay, there we go. And soccer. Loves, all caps, loves hip-hop dancing. Loves being in the YMCA adventure guides with her dad. Loves shopping with her mother. There's a surprise. Is part of the Girls on the Run program, and Katie raised funds through a bake sale and delivered much-needed supplies like laundry soap, shampoo, soap and toothpaste to the House of Hope here in Los Gatos. Recently, she went door to door in her neighborhood collecting over 75 pairs of shoes for the Souls for Souls charity. That's S-O-L-E-S for S-O-U-L-S. Souls for Souls charity. In June, with City Year and Synopsis, Katie will be helping refurbish Lee Matheson Middle School in East San Jose, a school with a huge at-risk and underserved student population. And Katie just earned the Presidential Physical Fitness Award, which means that in 5 different events, distance run, shuttle run, curl-ups, push-ups, and flexibility, she exceeded the 85th percentile. Very cool. And with Girls on the Run, Katie just ran a 5K, culminating a 3-month program that encourages preteen girls to develop self-respect and healthy lifestyles. And I'm tired just hearing about everything you do. My gosh, what energy. Please welcome Katie. Katie, come on up and lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A big hand for Katie. One more time, a big hand, please. All right. We have a couple of proclamations, so let me move down here. There we go. Okay. First, could I have Parks and Public Works Director Todd Capurso join me? Let you hold that while I read what this says. This is a proclamation for National Public Works Week. Whereas National Public Works Week was instituted as a public education campaign by the American Public Works Association in 1960 and calls attention to the importance of public works and in community life, and whereas public works services provided in Los Gatos are an integral part of our citizens' everyday lives, and health, safety, and comfort of Los Gatos greatly depend on these facilities and services. And whereas the quality and condition of these facilities, as well as their planning, design, and construction, is vitally dependent upon the efforts and skill of public works employees, and whereas the efficiency of the qualified and dedicated personnel who staff our Public Works Department is supported by the people's attitudes and understanding of the importance of the work they perform, and whereas this year's theme is Public Works, serving you and your community as we celebrate the hard work and dedication of the many public works professionals throughout the world and in our community. And whereas the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos urges its citizens to join communities throughout the state and nation in recognizing the substantial contributions that public works professionals make to the communities they serve, now therefore be it resolved, I, Steve Rice, by the virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the Town of Los Gatos, do deem it appropriate and do hereby proclaim May 20th through 26th, 2012 as National Public Works Week within the Town of Los Gatos, and call upon all citizens, civic leaders, and civil organizations to acquaint themselves with the issues involved in providing our public works and recognize the contributions which public works professionals make every day to ensure our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. Proclaimed this 21st day of May 2012 in the Town of Los Gatos, County of Santa Clara, State of California. Congratulations, Todd.
I would like to thank the mayor and the council for this proclamation. It's a great honor. As everyone knows, Public Works is all about construction of new facilities, and 2012 is no exception to that here in the town. I'm sure you've all experienced the recent grand opening of our new library, which was constructed largely by the Parks and Public Works Department. But also this year, we will also be building our new sports park this year and reopening the pageant grounds this year. In addition to the construction of new facilities, I would also like to recognize our ongoing maintenance efforts of all of our street maintenance workers, our parks maintenance workers, and our facilities maintenance workers. And it is our honor to serve this town. And everything that the mayor read in that proclamation is true. And I would like to invite you all to come out to our open house event this Wednesday, day after tomorrow, at the Service Center down at 41 Miles Avenue. We will be open for tours between 9 a.m. and noon, and we will have all of our equipment on display, and we are expecting lots of folks to stop by. So once again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Now I'd like to ask Steve Conway, our finance director, to come up here and join me. I always feel like this is a stacked deck when we're doing our budget hearing, and we're giving you an award for the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for fiscal year 2011-2012. This is the 15th year in a row the town has received this award, and it is in no small part due to your efforts in putting together a spectacular budget. And it says 4 categories. We have to be rated proficient in 4 categories designed to assess how well the budget serves as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, and a communications guide. Steve, we thank you very much for your fine efforts over the years, and congratulations.
Thank you, Mayor. I would this year like to invite Jenny Hariyama, our budget manager, to I really wanted to give a special thanks to her. She has been in the role for about 2 years, and I wanted to point out that Jenny, this is Jenny Hariyama, as I was mentioning, and Jenny and the rest of the team and all the town staff, we're very proud of the budget and the document that and the financial plan we present every year to the town. And the difference the quantifiable difference I'd like to point out about Jenny is every year this review process is pretty exhaustive, and we would get a few ticky-tack, I would call them, comments about things we could maybe change for next year. Yeah, I'm just in accountant ticky-tack speak. But anyway, those comments have almost gone to zero since Jenny has joined us, and her ability to add her level of oversight has just been invaluable. So I want to thank you personally for that. So we're very happy on behalf of all the town staff to receive this award again. And we're shooting for the budget tonight. Hopefully we'll be of the same quality that we expect of ourselves. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, while I move back to the dais, the closed session report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. The council met in closed session this evening as duly noticed on the agenda. The council took no action and there's nothing to report out this evening.
I needed 3 more seconds. Okay. Next, we come to council and manager matters. Do we have any council matters? Madam Vice Mayor.
Thank you. A couple of things. First of all, you'll be learning more about it, but Los Gatos now has 4 charging stations installed in various locations throughout the town. And secondly, and more recently, this past weekend, you may have noticed that there has been a beautification effort at the intersection of Santa Cruz and Highway 9 on the southwest corner, and that is due to many people, but most significantly Barbara Holden and the property owners Larry and Steve Regani. So that is all benefits all of us, and so I thank them on behalf of everybody up here.
Thank you. Anybody down here? I have one item under council matters. The mayor has been holding office hours on the 4th Saturday of each month. This month it happens to fall on Memorial Weekend, a 3-day weekend, so we won't be having mayor's hours this weekend. It'll resume in June. Manager matters.
Yes. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, a few items, and I did want to follow up on the budget recognition you just gave our director, Mr. Conway. That goes through an extensive peer review process, and I wanted to just read to you a couple brief comments from one CFO in another jurisdiction. This is about our budget last year. Great job. Everything looks really good. Sorry, no criticism to offer. I know that isn't helpful, but you are already at or near perfection. This may be one of the best-looking budgets I've ever reviewed. Formats, graphics, and presentation are all outstanding. Quite honestly, I'm jealous that this is far superior to my city. So that was what another finance director wrote in another city when reviewing your budget last year. So just wanted to share that comment with you. Also wanted to introduce a colleague of mine who's here visiting his sister, who is a Los Gatos resident, and I've never met him prior to tonight, but he's the city manager of Marchtrenk, Austria, and his name is Mr. Mario Pichler. If you could raise your hand, Mario. Thank you. So, and then we've had 3 recent events I just wanted to update the council on. First, last Thursday, the police department co-sponsored our first ever teen dating violence awareness workshop with 60 service providers and participants attacking an important issue for our youth. On Friday, the library and the Friends of the Library hosted noted novelist Eric Larson to a standing room only crowd in our new library. And then on Saturday, the town and the Chamber of Commerce co-hosted our first downtown wine walk for 2012. And those are 3 recent events I wanted to inform you of. We now come to the portion of the program called Did You Know? And sticking with our Public Works emphasis, Parks and Public Works Director Todd Capurso is back up to share tonight's Did You Know?
Thank you, Greg. So, as Greg said, in keeping with National Public Works Week, this segment of Did You Know will address the town street maintenance program and will provide a description of a recent successfully completed project. As many of you already know, the town maintains a street inventory of more than 100 miles that includes sidewalks, curb and gutter, roadway markings, as well as traffic signage. We do this using 2 types of resources: our operating resources, which typically come from the general fund to provide resources for our day-to-day work, as well as our capital funding, which comes from a variety of local funds, including the gas tax, and often includes grant funding. We also employ a variety of service delivery methods. We use in-house staff primarily for the smaller scale, more specialized work that requires a faster response and is customized to meet the needs of the town. And we also use contract work, which is usually capital funded for larger projects that extend the useful life of the assets and protect the town's investments. We also pursue multi-agency projects. These are typically contractual in nature and work on a reimbursement basis. It is less common to pool in-house resources. However, that is exactly what we did in February of this year along a section of Blossom Hill Road between Camino del Cerro and Union Avenue. This section of road is a joint responsibility between the town of Los Gatos and the city of San Jose. Late last year, our staff raised concerns regarding the structural integrity of this section of roadway. There were signs of base failure and the roadway was being undermined. We had also received concerns from residents about tree clearance issues as well as roadway visibility. With these concerns in mind, town staff contacted the City of San Jose to meet and discuss these issues. As the on-site meeting progressed, it became clear that both agencies possessed the resources and expertise needed to address these issues in a timely manner. We agreed to form a joint in-house team that would be strategically supplemented with contractual resources. We started with the tree trimming phase of this work. In fact, I should go back just for a second here, just to tell you about what the scope of the project was. It was to include tree trimming as well as to address the base failures of the roadway, which would be the dig-outs, the installation of the new asphalt, as well as restriping of the roadway. We started with the tree trimming portion of this work. Both agencies happened to utilize the same tree contractor, so this made for a highly efficient use of resources from both a financial and a timing perspective. For the actual paving work, we combined in-house staff resources with a contractually operated grinder. Staff from both agencies shared in the traffic control responsibilities, the trucking, and the installation of the new paving material. The restriping work was handled mainly by City of San Jose staff, with town staff providing traffic control as well as the supplies and materials necessary for this phase of work. This entire project was completed in 8 work days with minimal traffic disruption. It resulted in a smoother driving surface, extended the useful life of this section of roadway, increased the safety and the visibility of this section of roadway as well. This also provided a rare and wonderful opportunity for our staff to work cooperatively with their colleagues from another agency. All in all, the project was a great success. For additional information regarding the town street maintenance program, please find us on the town's website at www.losgatosca.gov, or please contact the Department of Parks and Public Works directly at 399-5770. And as I said earlier, we are holding an open house this coming Wednesday from 9 a.m. to noon at 41 Miles Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Thanks. Before we move on to this evening's consent calendar, I'll remind anybody that wishes to speak either during verbal communications this evening or speaking to any of our agenda items to please fill out one of the buff-colored cards in front of you in the benches, back of the benches. Turn it in to the clerk on my left, your right. Next, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Any council member wish to pull an item? Councilmember Brzezinski?
Mr. Mayor, I don't intend to pull the item, but clarification of item 3. This is the flagpole dedication. On page 2, it talks about 3 possible ways to phrase the dedication. Is it necessary for us to make a choice of that, or is this just choosing to approve and to allow staff to work to create the appropriate language?
This is actually the first of 2 corrections to consent calendar items. The request is for, if the council approves this item, is for staff to work with the policy committee to approve one of the 3 recommended wordings. And we do have a typographical error in one of the wordings, but that would be worked out with the policy committee before it proceeded. And that's the recommendation before you.
Thank you.
And if I may follow, we have an administrative correction to the minutes where one of the public speakers was incorrectly identified, and we have corrected that in the formal minutes.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Leonardis.
Mr. Mayor, I will be abstaining my vote on item number 3.
Okay. Does anybody from the public wish to pull a consent item? Seeing none, I will look for a motion on the consent agenda.
Move to approve consent.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously with the abstention of Councilmember Leonardis on item number 3. Next, we come to verbal.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of order that your rules do require on an abstention for a stated reason on the record.
Okay. Councilmember Leonardis.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Attorney. As a member of the Kiwanis Club, I had an active role in this particular project with the Kiwanis Club. So, thank you.
Does that suffice, Madam Attorney?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving on, we have verbal communications. I don't have any cards. I don't see any cards moving this way, but does anybody from the public wish to speak under verbal communications? Must be an item that's not on tonight's agenda. You can fill out the card afterwards. Gone. Verbal communications. Next, we'll move to public hearings. Agenda item number 8, the operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 2012 and 13 and the capital improvement program for fiscal years 2012 through 2017. I see Mr. Conway has moved to the front of the line.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'll be starting the presentation. First, I just want to orient you to the documents and to the public to the online documents. You should have the operating budget binder, the capital improvement program budget binder, a staff report that was included in your council agenda packet, a desk item that was distributed today with responses to 20-some questions received over the weekend, and then the slides we will be presenting to you tonight. And additional copies of the slides are available for the audience as well. Our presentation tonight, as in prior years, is going to start with this brief introduction, a budget overview by the finance director, going through departmental highlights by the assistant finance director. I'll come back to discuss some additional policy items before the council, before moving on to a CIP highlights by the Parks and Public Works Director. We'll take pauses at points in time for questions from council, and then we do ask for public comment before moving on to direction. So the first couple slides would this last year has been a bit of a budgetary roller coaster. We had the continuing recession, which is going into our 5th fiscal year. We've had declining revenue from our largest taxpayer that is due to both changing market demand as well as a changing business model, and all caused by an antiquated state and federal tax structure which does not recognize digital or out-of-state goods. We've had ongoing challenges with the state and now the county trying to obtain local government funds, most recently through the dissolution of redevelopment, and we'll talk about that more later. And then on the expense side, we have rising pension costs, medical costs, some final police cost of living increases, and environmental costs related to stormwater discharge, most notably, but also air quality and the link of transportation and housing. Moving on to the budget development process, a year ago in May 2011, we gave you a 5-year forecast which projected $7 million in shortfalls through the 5-year forecast. The council directed at that time that we do a review of budget priorities before coming to this point. In November at the Commission Forum, we projected a $4 million gap for next year alone. That gap was subsequently reduced due to the retention of Netflix sales tax by their decision not to move the DVD operation out of town and to leave the town with 100% of that revenue. In January at your council retreat, we projected a $1.8 million gap for next year, which you'll hear discussed more, and that's really the difference from the $4 million in November, dropping to $1.8 million in January, primarily due to sales tax receipts, as well as a little bit of some revenue from redevelopment. At that November retreat, or January retreat, the council rank ordered over $12 million worth of budget proposals into 3 tiers. Tiers 1, Tiers 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 being the first to go to, and Tier 3 being the last to go to. And you will hear that reference during the balance of our presentation. What we're bringing for you tonight is a balanced proposed budget that we think shows a 5-year forecast that is manageable. That does not mean easy, but manageable for the future with the continuation of the prudent budgeting and fiscal practices that the town has exercised for more than a decade. With that, I'd now like to turn it over to Finance Director Steve Conway for the balanced budget overview.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Mayor, members of council. I'm very happy once again to be introducing the fiscal year proposed 12-13 budget, which is a balanced budget. The budget is approximately for the general fund is $35.3 million, and we will be discussing there is the standard operating revenues, but I would like to point out the one interesting addition is our fund balance for designated uses to our revenues. This is not uncommon. We have this in every one of our balanced budgets, and the bulk of that amount of money is being transferred from the general fund for our capital projects works, which will be discussed later. They have that funding source has been designated for that use, so it's a piggy bank in the general fund that we access and then transfer. The balance of the fund balance use, approximately 0.4 million, will be discussed later on under our policies discussion. We had a $1.8 million gap, as the manager has discussed earlier, and so that was our target that we had to achieve for a balanced budget in fiscal year 12-13, and that was accomplished through Tier 1 reductions and adjustments of $1.1 million. We were able to conservatively increase our revenue projections by $500,000. That was on the good side. On the bad side, of course, we had to factor in rising operating costs of $300,000. The bulk of that was from our employee benefits side, but there was also an increased operating cost related to the new library, which we did expect and had planned for. As I mentioned earlier, we have a $500,000 either fund balance or new revenue alternative that the manager will be discussing later on in tonight's presentation. The updated 5-year forecast, as the manager has discussed, we have continued our assumptions that the Netflix sales tax revenues will continue to drop. We've been in discussions with Netflix and have used some of their forecast to inform our forecast. So we do see that as a continuing trend, and we have factored that in. The good news is on other revenues, most notably our property tax has, we believe, bottomed out and is starting to trend more positively. We have a 2.5% forecast in 12-13, and that's slightly conservative. The latest information as of a week ago was we're trending about 3.5% growth, which is very good news, and we hope that that will continue. We also have factored in on the expenditure side some increase to our pension and health costs that were informed through actuarial studies and also notification from PERS. I'm glad to say that the prior forecast had predicted a slightly higher pension costs, but PERS has lowered those slightly, although they still are increasing. The updated 5-year forecast does tell us that we have future challenges ahead. We have up to $2.4 million in future adjustments we need to work through in our budget work. This will be alleviated if we have a stronger economy in the future. If not, we will likely experience more service cuts, and we may be recommending in the future that some bridge funding through any future second dips, if there are any other recessionary impacts. We may likely recommend some reserve funding to bridge to maintain service levels to bridge those gaps. I'm happy also to report that the reserves remain strong. In our general fund, we have $20.7 million of total reserves, and very happy to say that we have $7.4 million in our budget stabilization reserve, along with our catastrophic reserve of $3.7 million and capital projects reserve of $5.1 million. Those are substantial reserves. They're in excess of our required minimum, and once again, we have not had to tap those reserves, so they remain strong and intact and available for use in the future if need be. And that ends my part of the presentation. I'd like to turn this next section over to our Assistant Finance Director and Budget Manager, Jenny Hariyamu, who will discuss the departmental highlights.
Great, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. As the town manager spoke to earlier, the council went through a service prioritization process and reviewed a number of tiered reductions. Tonight's presentation will cover those in Tier 1, which are attached to your staff report. I believe that's attachment 3. The first item up on the slide is administrative services, which includes an elimination of a vacant staff technician, as well as reductions in training, travel, and other expenses. Community development has a couple of changes, a reclassification of a temporary planner to a senior planner, really to assist with workload and organizational efficiencies. They'll also be reclaiming a previously shared building inspector with Parks and Public Works due to an uptick in building activity that's anticipated for 12-13. And to help offset those costs as a result of these adjustments, they have made significant reductions in their temporary hours in staff, particularly their interns that support development services. Police includes the elimination of a vacant police officer, as well as a mid-year consolidation with community personnel and traffic units upon the retirement of a sergeant position, which is anticipated to happen mid-year. Next is Parks and Public Works. That includes the elimination of a Parks and Public Works manager. This manager was previously managing the library construction project, and upon a retirement through November, they will also be managing the Creekside Sports Park project as well, and that is noted in your CIP document. Also, we will be transferring some other engineering and expenses into the CIP as appropriate. There are a variety of different projects in the CIP in which we can charge applicable engineering and inspection expenses. That's alliteration. And then library, finally. We've added a number of temporary hours to help support operational needs in the library, including clerks and pages, primarily with circulation and systems support. And then finally, in your attachment number 4 to your staff report, we're seeking funding and support for teen services, and that's a part of the town needs list. That concludes my report. If you have any other questions, and one more thing is the most important, is the continuation of non-sworn unpaid furloughs. That totals a value of $200,000. Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we could pause, or I could finish the staff report and then take all the council questions at once.
I think that would be the preference unless somebody wants to jump in. Okay, let's do that.
We do have a few additional policy matters we wanted to raise for you. Most of these are addressed in the staff report that was in the agenda. First, our library weekend hours. As the council will recall, upon the opening of the new library, you implemented expanded Saturday hours to deal with a dramatic increase in customer demand. We've given you 2 options for continued library weekend hours, which are not included in the base budget, but options are provided for you to add that. This is in the staff report on page 7, and additional information in your desk item. The 2 options we've presented is adding 3 hours on Saturday at a cost roughly of $50,000, or 1 hour to both Saturday and Sunday at a cost of $25,000. We have also provided information in the staff report on page 9 regarding some augmented senior services. First, the Live Oak Day program here in Los Gatos across the street at the Methodist Church is no longer funded through county CDBG, so we're recommending a minimum allocation of $13,000 to maintain their essential and high-quality programs to the town. And with the transition of the former neighborhood center to the adult recreation center, we have not had dedicated senior case management staffing, and we're recommending an additional $7,000 allocation for that purpose, which is again addressed in the staff report and the desk item. Last, under other budget considerations, the Arts Commission has asked for a reallocation of previously approved arts fund to other purposes. Staff is continuing with the prior recommendation of maintaining the arts funding where it was previously set, and to use an existing fund balance for arts programs to meet the needs of the Arts Commission when they bring back their public art project for council consideration at a future date. As the finance director mentioned, the budget includes a default use of an estimated $500,000 in current year fund balance to roll over to keep next year's budget balanced. We do have two alternatives for your consideration. We believe it is now possible to recognize additional revenue the town will receive of $500,000 to $750,000 resulting from the dissolution of redevelopment, and or to recognize additional revenue that will come as the town share as the underlying property owner for a private property transfer of Villa Vasona, where we get a residual income from that private sector transaction that is currently estimated at $750,000 and is expected to close at the end of this calendar year. So these are the options we're providing the council for your final budget balancing, as well as to go into steeper cuts through the Tier 2 proposals that are provided as an attachment to the staff report, but all of those would entail additional service reductions and staff workload considerations. Now this is rebuilding, excuse me. There. Future budget issues we did want to highlight. Staff is recommending that we have a special council study session either with the first quarter budget review or at some point prior to your council retreat in January, February, to deal with a prior council direction from last year's retreat of looking at capital projects funding and priorities. We have a series of incomplete redevelopment projects that we'll talk about shortly under the redevelopment update. A year ago, the council recommended we look at potential one-time technology investments to improve customer service and staff efficiency, and our recommendation would be to come back to you, as I said, in fall with both the revenue side and the potential expenses, plus any other proposals you put forward at that time. At the mid-year budget review, we've identified two issues that will need to come back for you. Again, these are both cited in the staff report. Environmental services funding is the broader labeling for the street sweeping, solid waste, stormwater discharge system that could also be expanded to include sustainability exercises and housing and transportation linkages. That is a rapidly growing cost area for the town that will require some focused analysis by town staff to bring to you for consideration at mid-year. Similarly, our police department has gone through a variety of staffing changes, and we are exploring a number of alternatives for staffing reconfiguration and management and overtime and training needs, which were prior budget reductions, but may need to be revisited in the future. Last, we have labor negotiations scheduled over the next year with all of our bargaining groups, which will give us additional opportunities to address rising pension and retiree medical costs, as well as the cost of service delivery. We were asked by a couple of council members to provide an update on issues related to redevelopment. As the mayor knows, as the chair of the oversight board, and as town staff knows, this is taking an extraordinary amount of staff time to deal with the interpretation and implementation of state law related to the dissolution of redevelopment. And what we're finding is that through county and state actions, town resources are being minimized in a number of areas. First, while state law was quite clear that local government is to receive $250,000 per fiscal year for implementation of the dissolution of redevelopment, we found that that reimbursement for this fiscal year has been unilaterally reduced in half. In addition, there are innumerable county overhead costs that are being taken off the top for audit work and staff support to a variety of functions that reduces the amount of tax increment that will ultimately be shared with the taxing entities. And then what we've found is that the actual allocation formula that's being proposed penalizes both the town and fire and other municipal services, and it's most beneficial to the schools and county. And ironically, as this whole effort was put in place by the state as part of their budget balancing, we have not identified any budget benefit whatsoever to the state of California for the dissolution of Los Gatos redevelopment. We also have faced a narrow definition of what are incomplete projects, which links to the issue that we'll be bringing back to you in the fall, and that is how do we fund Almond Grove Streets reconstruction, the completion of Paget grounds, and even some remaining library, new library construction and implementation costs that had previously been targeted for redevelopment funding, but may no longer be eligible from that source based on county and state interpretations. The status of affordable housing remains unknown. There are separate proposals in the state legislature, and from the governor, the legislature would retain affordable housing assets for local use, and while the governor's proposal would take all affordable housing assets, and redistribute them to all the taxing entities, and we won't know till budget adoption which path we're on. This affects not only fund balance we have in our 20% housing fund, but it also certainly affects the expanded Main Street parking lot, which we've included as a capital project, and it might or might not affect Ditto's Lane, depending on the interpretation of state law, which won't be known again to the earliest, the end of June, and then there could be statewide litigation or legislative follow-up that leaves that in limbo till 2013. I would now like to move to a brief presentation on the fee adjustments that we have proposed. Again, this came out of the council's budget retreat, where you placed a review of fees to ensure cost recovery as a Tier 1 budget priority. We've divided that into two sets of work: development-related costs to rise over time to full cost recovery, and secondly, the council asked staff to evaluate as a Tier 1 budget priority our impact fees, particularly as they relate to traffic, parks, and environmental. It is our plan to bring the impacts fee evaluation back to you as part of that capital budget discussion in the late fall or winter, since those are primarily capital-related funding sources, while the development-related cost recovery, we are recommending a number of changes tonight. First, just to recall, in April, you did approve the normal annual CPI increase to most all of our building and planning and engineering fees. What we're proposing tonight is some additional building and planning fee changes that are all based not only on your prior direction at the January retreat, but using as the source data the 2010 cost recovery fee study, with the resulting a number of increases, a few decreases, and the restructuring of several fees. The proposed budget before you assumes a $50K revenue from all of these changes to achieve the balanced budget. The public hearing for these fee increases will be on June 4th, leading to an implementation date of August 4th, and any direction you provide tonight on the fees will be incorporated into the actionable document on June 4th. Two major areas we're looking at changes. For building fees, we're not recommending any changes to the actual rates or fees other than what you've already approved through the CBI process. But most all building fees are a factor applied against the cost of construction, and we have not updated that basis for construction valuation for quite some time, and that's what we're recommending tonight. We have most recently been using the 2002, that's International Chief Building Officials Building Standards, and we're recommending moving to actually the 2012, excuse me, that's a typo on the slide, International Code Compliance Standards. Those standards project national average construction costs that are then adjusted for regional variances to meet the local construction cost index. This is the standard that is now used by most agencies instead of the ICBO standard. So we are moving in line with most of our fellow agencies. However, it would result in likely increases to most of our building fees on the order of 10 to 12%. On the planning fee side, we have a number of fees largely in the planning area that would have a maximum of a 10% increase. We have some fees we'd recommend up to a 30% increase, and this would be primarily for non-residential and multiple dwelling architecture and site applications, as well as a new second tier for major restaurants, which have proven to be a cost and workload burden for the town. We have a very few fees that we're recommending greater than a 30% increase. One of those is the administrative land use permit for wireless telecom facilities, given the extensive neighborhood communication that's required and the work related to that, and then also for our CDAC reviews. There are a number of fees we're either modifying or reducing. Most noteworthy is that we're recommending our plan development and rezoning applications be charged on an actual time and materials basis rather than a flat rate fee. We find these applications vary significantly from minor to major, that it's almost an inequitable fee basis that we're using currently. For minor projects, they would see lower fees on a time and materials basis, while for major projects, they would see no change or a slightly higher cost. There would also be modest decreases recommended for ANS and subdivision applications that are part of a plan development that are feed on a time and materials basis. Before moving to the CIP, it may be appropriate to deal with the operating budget questions at this time, or we could have Todd Capurso present the CIP, and then staff is all done.
Pleasure of the council. Why don't we go ahead and move forward? It's over here.
All right, thank you, Greg. So as we begin the CIP development process, we first take stock of the current year projects. Many of those projects carry forward, which impacts the staff and financial capacity for the upcoming year. We revisit our planned projects as well as our unfunded needs list, and we prioritize projects to match the appropriate funding source. Once this process is complete, we present this document to the Planning Commission to ensure compliance with the town's general plan. The 5-year CIP being presented to you tonight is in the order of $27 million. More than 2/3 of this will occur in the first fiscal year of that document, fiscal year 12-13. Not only as a result of carry forward projects, but with nearly $5 million of new projects as well. I'd like to talk about a few of the specific projects. So for some of the highlights for upcoming fiscal year 12-13, we will see the completion of the Blossom Hill Safe Routes to School project between Cherry Blossom and Camino del Cerro, just west of the project that I described earlier. And we are also planning on continuing the funding for Phase 1 of the Almond Grove Street Rehabilitation Plan. And we will also move forward with the grant-funded University Avenue resurfacing project, which will occur between Blossom Hill and Shelburne Way. Along the parks front, we will see the completion of the pageant grounds, which has recently been before council and will be again on June 18th for the landscaping improvements, approval of plans and specs. And we are continuing the completion of the Los Gatos Creekside Sports Park, which is currently under construction and will be completed later this calendar year. On the public facilities side, we will see the completion of the LEED certification process for the new library, as well as the continuing and finalizing of a plan for the reuse of the former library space. So with that, I will turn it back to Town Manager Greg Larson.
I'll be Greg Larson for right now. So the recommended actions tonight are obviously to take public comment, council discussion, and then council direction and action. And we've listed those items here for you, which we'll go over in further detail as directed by council.
Okay, I'm going to look to council first, and then we'll do the public hearing for any questions and clarifications. Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for the manager, I guess. How soon may we possibly or potentially realize the RDA funds from the dissolution of the RDA?
That's $1 million question. It will be, we believe, in this next fiscal year. We cannot predict when in that fiscal year. We are awaiting the state budget to be adopted, which will include clarifying language. There are audits that need to be conducted by the town, by the county, by the State Department of Finance and the State Controller's Office, all of which culminating sometime late this calendar year, hopefully for some distribution of tax increment or redevelopment reserves in the first half of 2013 to the town of Los Gatos as well as to the other taxing entities, school districts, community college district, county, and the fire department.
So,
I would guess early 2013 in this fiscal year is our hope. If there's statewide litigation, it could delay that.
okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. Let me follow up on that. Staff stated with regard to those two items, the RDA funding and the Villa Vasona funding, that those funds would be recognized. That, to me, is a term of art that indicates a certainty as opposed to a contingency. Is it staff's representation or statement that the RDA funds or the Villa Vasona funding is a certainty as opposed to a probability or possibility?
All revenue projections that are included in the budget are that. They're revenue projections. We are not budgeting revenues that have already been received, but revenues that we reasonably anticipate receiving. And we would put the fund balance from this year rolling over to next year, as well as the Villa Vasona, as well as a portion of the redevelopment funds as reasonably expected to be received in the next fiscal year. If the council desires to pursue some combination of revenue adjustments, staff is prepared to make a recommendation at that time.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One more question. With regard to the fund balance, I think I know what you're talking about when you say that, but I think it would be helpful if I knew for sure and people listening to you knew for sure. So if you could explain that, please.
One of the historical strengths of our financial practices has been a very conservative approach to budgeting and financial projections, and some of that is implicit in the public financial structure, where revenues are cautiously estimated and expenditures are more aggressively estimated. Because the penalties of overexpending a budget are so great, usually expenditures are underspent. So what we anticipate is by the end of this fiscal year, we will have revenues greater than what is budgeted and expenses that actually come in lower than are budgeted for a combined net benefit of at least $500,000 that would be additional year-end fund balance that would roll over to next year for council use if you so choose to do that.
Thank you.
I'll follow up on that just to be clear. If we chose not to use the fund balance, where does that fund balance end up?
The fund balance would roll forward to your discussion on capital project priorities as an additional source of revenue at that time, which is also likely where the Villa Vasona revenue would materialize and or any redevelopment one-time funding. So it really becomes a council preference of use of fund balance or additional reasonable revenue recognition.
Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none, I do have one card from the public. I'll open the public hearing, and I have the card from Colleen. Is it Hudger? Hudgen. Oh, that's an N? Hudgen, okay. I'm sorry.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, council members, town manager. I want to congratulate you on the wonderful commendation that you got. I am the Executive Director of Live Adult Day Services, and we too strive for excellence in what we do. And we see it every day in the faces of the seniors that we serve. So I want to applaud staff for the recommendation that they put forward that you fund us. We are in the second year of a 2-year cycle that we thought we would be getting the money, but as you have all been well advised of, the redevelopment and restructuring at the state has made Live Oak one of its casualties. And so as an agency that has been providing services to Los Gatos residents for over 30 years, excellent services to frail seniors, the average age is about 87, 89. I went to 2 birthday parties a week ago for people that turned 100. There were 2 ladies. They are dancing. One of them danced all day. Am I finished?
No, you have another minute.
No, I have to keep going. Okay. But anyway, I just want to share with you, first of all, thank you that you're even considering this, because it is a tragedy that we would have to be forced to maybe even close the center, because we are getting funding from 10 cities And so all of the ones that are impacted by this redevelopment shift, we're losing that funding. So you guys are great. I love you for doing this. But let me tell you a little bit about what we do. Monday through Friday from 9 to 3, we welcome in seniors from Los Gatos. These are frail seniors who live with family. The family is providing 24-hour non-medical care, but they cannot be left alone. They are dependent on that family member 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there are no holidays, no vacations. Without a program like Live Oak, where they can lovingly come in and my staff take care of them, provide a well-balanced breakfast and lunch. But in the meantime, from the minute they arrive until they leave, they're loved, they're being just inundated with socialization and fun and activities that they cannot get at home. It's priceless. So I am here to just thank you for what you're doing and just say keep up the good work, because you're doing a great job here in Los Gatos. And we're part of the same team. We're on the same side. Mary, my program director, does a great job. If you haven't been to the center, please go there. I know that you came to our 30th anniversary, and it was a great event where we really celebrated what we do. We have who do we serve? We serve doctors. We have a new doctor. He's a gynecologist. He is the greatest guy. You need to come by just to meet him. We have engineers, firemen. We have lots of teachers, people that have built this town, this valley. They're elderly now. They're frail. They weren't always a burden, but now they deserve dignity and respect, and they deserve to be able to stay in the community for as long as medically they can. And we're part of that. We're there for the families. We have caregivers who say, I couldn't do this without you. I don't know what I would do without you. And so my message to them is we couldn't do it without you. Are there any questions?
Now, that's my job. Are there any questions?
I'm sorry.
We have no questions. Thank you very much.
You didn't have on me tonight, but thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak on agenda item 8, our budget? I have no other cards. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and I'll look to council for further discussion, additional questions, or we can move into Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to go ahead and leap in.
Go right ahead.
Leap? Okay. But first, I do want to compliment the staff, as I do every year, on the budget, and I do have the opportunity to read other jurisdictions' budgets as part of my day job, so I'm in a position to compare and contrast, and the town very much deserves the A+ that it gets every year from the Professional Association, and I really appreciate it when it's such a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and I have to sit there and read through 3 inches of binder that at least it reads a little bit like a novel. In answer to some of the issue questions that staff has posed, the assumed $50,000 of revenue from increased development fees, I know we have some additional sources of revenue. I don't want to talk a lot about that tonight because there's a whole lot of information that we don't have, and it's coming up on our next council meeting. I do have a lot of questions and some concerns about what's the definition of development, some of which you've addressed tonight, but I do think we want to be fair and careful in our analysis of that. So if our final action looks like it's only going to produce $35,000 or $40,000 worth of revenue, I'm assuming that in some ways that's spare change in a $33 million budget, and that staff can work that out. In terms of the question about use of rollover fund balance versus this one-time income sources, I very much favor rollover fund balance. I mean, that's like you come to the end of the month, you've paid all your bills, you still have money in the checking account, you just save it for next month and get a head start. On the certainly the Live Oak Day Services, continuing the funding for them, the additional money for case management, I support. Maintaining the funding for the arts organization, I support. I do think it would be good at our council retreat in January or maybe that's too late, maybe it has to be in the fall, to have a council conversation about our policy, about continuing to fund our nonprofit organization, both arts and health and human services, because of the changes out there, and we've been on this 2-year cycle, so I think it's a good time before we get too far into that cycle and set the commissions up to start doing their work, that council says what we think about continuing that in a tough budgetary environment. What else did you have ask us? The library hours. So, not surprisingly, I am going to, I would support additional library hours. I would support keeping the Saturday hours. I know we have some data that shows compare and contrast between a Wednesday and a Saturday, which is a little unfair because Wednesday, I believe, is a story time, which usually brings in a ton of children, parents, and nannies, and so on. And it's also a very busy day at the senior center, which I assume spills over onto the library. I just do feel that for those who need that Saturday morning, and as we go through the year, I think the seasonality will change, and so I would like to support keeping the Saturday hours, and then at the end of the year, really having the data and examining that as we go forward. And I think I covered all of your questions.
Planning and building fee changes.
I talked about the June 4th.
Oh, June 4th,
Yeah.
sorry. Yes.
And the only other two comments separate from that I wanted to be sure to get in, the move of emergency preparation to the fire department, I understand, I think that's a good thing, but I think we need to monitor it very closely. Not that we don't trust the fire department, but, you know, when it's not under your control, your supervision, their priorities are not necessarily your priorities. So just as we closely monitor recreation department's delivery of services to our senior community, I think we want to really keep a very close eye on that to make sure that they are meeting our expectations. And I would also suggest, in terms of the Almond Grove, that we get some community meetings set up soon so that the neighborhood can start thinking about and expressing their feelings on concrete versus asphalt, is kind of the shorthand version, because if I remember right from that presentation a year ago, it makes a big difference on the final price tag as to which way we go. And as we're trying to figure out a budgeting mechanism, I just think we need to have a realistic dollar amount to work with. And I believe that answers everything. I got all my points in.
Okay.
Thanks.
Additional comments? That's it. Everybody's happy. Councilmember Brzezinski?
Of course we're happy. I mean, that's a given. I guess I'm curious about process, Mr. Mayor. Do you want us to weigh in on each of the items? For example, I could agree with many of the things that Councilwoman McNutt pointed out, but how are we going to process so that we can make the recommendation? Is it by consensus or a vote? What's your
I'm going to look to the manager. We're not really calling for a...
You don't have to adopt the budget tonight. What we are looking for is your direction of what to include in the actionable documents that will come before you as a consent calendar item on June 4th, not for the fees, but for the budget itself.
Right.
So for me, the critical issues are the ones that are listed up there. What would you like included for library weekend hours, for the arts and senior services? Do you want that arts maintained and senior added, use of fund balance versus increased revenue, and those are really the critical issues I think that we need direction on tonight to bring a final actionable document to you on June 4th.
So what I'll do from a process perspective is I'll take Councilmember McNutt's body of her comments as a starting point. If somebody has any differences with that, we can discuss that and maybe come to consensus. I didn't hear anything I was uncomfortable with there, so I'd be fine with that. If somebody has a difference, we'll bring it up. So, Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am very comfortable with the positions that Councilwoman McNutt has taken, and I do want to say to staff, extraordinary job, and as usual. And we are very fortunate to have a staff from the manager right on through the whole finance department and the rest of our directors to provide us a budget that is capable of being justified and allows us to continue to be extraordinarily astute in our fiscal management, and at the same time is respectful of community services and we have done a really good job, and it's a team effort, and the community has been very cooperative in all of these efforts. So kudos to all of you, and it makes our job an awful lot easier. I would say one thing I would like to perhaps ask to consider, and that's the library weekend hours. I do agree with Councilwoman McNutt's orientation towards the increased hours, but I would like to probably hear more from the staff on the analysis of the population trends, where they do arrive. Is it more valuable to put an extra hour on Sunday and adjust the library hours to be coincident? I would like to hear more about that, because I think that it deserves to be given more than just a quick overview. That's one thing. Definitely the fund balance is where we want to move at the end of this process, so that we can increase those revenues appropriately. As far as the arts and senior services, no question we need to sustain both. Really appreciate the work of Live Oak. There's no question. I cannot imagine, because we've been to your facility a couple of times. We've enjoyed talking to the folks. They love it there. You do a great job on a shoestring, and I actually am amazed at how much of a community you build there with the support that you've got. So no question, if we can continue that support and benefit you, then I'm all for it. And the arts, of course, we've got a brand new project coming up that we're looking forward to, potentially in our library reuse. And I want to do nothing that would diminish our support for the arts as we move forward. So I'm in agreement with all of those, but I would like to hear the library analysis a little bit more extensively.
And I think we may be able to do that this evening. If so, why
I
don't
would
we
ask Ms. Dido, our library director, to come to the microphone.
Yep, that'd be great.
Good evening, Council. The library would of course like 10 hours of service every day, but in lieu of that, the proposal was to expand weekend hours and take the compaction that happens on Saturdays and Sundays. We compact into 4 hours about the equivalency of 8 hours worth of a daily work during the week. We studied the figures and showed that the trend has been that the 12 o'clock hour has expanded on Saturday to take up some of that slack, but that the 10 and 11, while people are attending, are not as fully or robustly used as other days. So we were hoping to relieve the compaction on Sundays by adding 1 hour to Sunday and adding 1 hour to Saturday, to add 2 hours to the weekend at a cost of half of the cost of adding 3 hours to the Saturday. It was just to try to relieve the compaction on Sunday and Saturday by spreading it out. The ideal scenario would be 2 hours on each day, but that's a little more expensive than what the Saturday hours are. So that was the analysis, and that's why we counted on Wednesday as a day. We were actually looking at noon. That was the hour, to see how busy a noon hour was and what we should expect from a noon hour. And we were getting it on Saturday, and we're not getting the equal use. And I discounted the fact that there was a story time too on Wednesday mornings. And didn't really. So okay. That's the basis of the analysis for that, to relieve the compaction on the weekend 4-hour shifts. Questions?
Councilmember Brzezinski.
So, Ms. Dido, it's your opinion that just using the Saturday time frame, that your observation, and this is anecdotal and statistical, but I'm looking more for your expertise as the director.
Sure.
Your opinion, if I'm reading you correctly, is that we will not really impact the use of the Saturday library hours by moving that back, and we're still going to be able to accommodate the bulk of people who will normally come to the library on Saturday. I know when we proposed or approved the additional hours on Saturday, it was primarily so that we served the community. and that the community was constrained in the hours on Saturday when they have the most flexibility, they're free of work, they're free of school, and so forth. Your observation is that that hasn't really proven
Our
to be
observation
necessary?
is that at 12 o'clock, we get the total of people in the hour, into the library between 12 and 1 that we get between 10 and 12. So that's why we were recommending that extra hour to relieve some of that compaction on Sundays also. We're viewing them as weekend hours as opposed to Saturday hours to let the working class person or the family-oriented thing to come. Sundays, if you've ever been over there, my staff describes it to me as a madhouse. So we're looking to extend the madhouse over 5 hours as opposed to 4 hours on both of those days.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Dido? Really? I'm surprised. Councilmember McNutt.
Not a question for her, since I'm always pushing. So what would it cost to be 10 to 5 on Saturday and 12 to 5 on Sunday?
Thinking that might come up, I was just trying to pencil some numbers. We would have the $50,000 expense for Saturday, and going to 12 on 5 would be half of the 25.
Yes.
So I think it would be a 62.5 expense ballpark. Maybe we budget 65 just so we're not short. So I would assume roughly an extra 15,000.
Yes, that would be. The only reason we propose to keep them even is that it's sometimes easier to tell people. You give them a range of hours of when you can come to the library. Instead of trying to remember when we open or when we close, we say, if you come to the library at noon on any day, we'll be open. If you come to the library so that's why we just like to, for consistency and telling people when to remember to come to us. But we'd love any hours that we can get.
Thank you, Ms. Dido.
So, Mayor, you're looking at me.
Council, well, I'm anticipating a comment.
Well, I just, again, we have this incredible new asset. The community is still exploring. We're still figuring out how this is going to work. There's a big surge when anything new gets started, and then it kind of levels off. And as I said, there's seasonality. I mean, library use in the summer is different, I think, because just, anecdotally, will you stop there before you head off for the day? Or you go there because it's too hot and you don't have air conditioning at home. I mean, there's all of these factors that play into it. So I would like us to push as much as possible to have maximum hours to serve the community for a full year, let things even out, and then do the analysis. For another $12,000, that's, again, a very small amount in a $33 million budget. So that would be my choice.
So you're modifying your proposal or your prior comments to 10 to 5 on Saturday, noon to 5 on Sunday, and if I heard the manager correctly, instead of a $50,000 adjustment, it's a $65,000 adjustment just to allow for whatever. Okay. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I'm going to hit upon some of the things that have been discussed so far, and also, not all of them, and also discuss some things that have not been. I agree at this point with the use of the fund balance, but in my mind, it's not money that's left over after you pay your bills. It is money that's left over after you pay your bills that we've been using for capital improvements, and we don't have any other monies for capital improvements. So I would be comfortable using that fund balance of about $500,000 for our operating expenses if we targeted the RDA funds or the Villa Vasona funds to take the place of that fund balance, since staff has indicated that they anticipate that one or both of those monies will be recognized during the upcoming year. With regard to the construction costs, or whatever they were called in our report, and I know that's going to be coming back to us, but as a general proposition, and I believe this is what the staff report states, that would be acceptable to me as long as we excluded single-family homes. from those increased costs. Now going to the rest of my notes. And as I said, some of these things will relate to what has been said, and some of the things will not. In our staff report, there is reference to a community survey regarding the Parks Master Plan. For a couple of reasons, I'm hoping that if we go forward with this, I'm assuming it's going to come back before us, but it's not something that I'm really enthusiastic about. One, because of the cost of a survey, and secondly, because I believe that any community survey needs to be really, really, really well done in order to accurately capture what the community believes. And I've just seen a lot of community surveys that I do not think meet that criteria. Donation opportunities have come up. And I noticed that someone asked about how much is being collected. I still support the concept of putting donation opportunities before the public so that they can contribute. But I think that if we want it to be more successful than it is, the items are going to have to be specified. There are going to have to be more specification, more publication, and there's going to have to be a line item amount for whatever it is we're asking for. The way it is now, it's just too general, and so it doesn't grab people. This sort of relates to, I think, what was in administration, and I realize that this is not going to happen in 2012-13, but I thought I'd put it out there anyway. I found out that Mid-Peninsula Open Space District, in order to reduce its staff and paper cost, has its board using instead an iPad. And I thought, oh my God, that's a terrible idea because I write all over my paper, only to find out that they are able to write all over their electronic paper. And so that's how they were able to satisfy the needs of their board. And I put that out there as something that we might want to consider because they did it because it's saving them money. With regard to the library weekend hours, based upon staff's presentation, Ms. Dido, based upon what we have in our staff report, based upon the $25,000, I'd be inclined to go along with the staff recommendation, although quite frankly it's not going to kill me if it doesn't go that way, but that would be my inclination. I'm very pleased to see that we are able to have both funding for the arts, the new project that the Arts Commission has come up with, and yet meet the other prior allocations. And that's all I have.
Okay. Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the good things about going last is you get to listen to what everybody else says, and then you don't have to repeat everything that they said that you agree with. So I agree with most of what's been said regarding the recommendations so far. Just have some general comments, and perhaps Mr. Conway can address this, because I'm not necessarily worried so much about this year's budget, but I'm worried about what the future looks like, the 5-year projections. And I guess the first thing I want to ask is how often in your career, 15 years I know of awards so far, have we had to rely on our reserves to help balance our budget?
Every adopted budget, Councilmember, has had a recommended use of capital project reserves. Those are monies, as you know, that we set aside for specific long-term capital improvements. So every adopted budget that we've had since I've been Director of Finance has always included that use of reserves. So that being said, this is the first year that we have potentially used our fund balance carryover, as the manager explained, in terms of an operating budget. So it's the first year that we've done so. but at a very, when we look at our $32 million budget, it's a fairly modest use of that funding source. So it's the first time we've done it, but it's also a very modest use of it that we've recommended if council wishes to go that way.
Thank you. I mean, I am encouraged by the fact that we have been fortunate and, mostly the fact that it is only a $500,000 potential, even though we may realize, I know we've estimated conservatively in those things. Again, I'm worried about the future, and that's up for future discussion at another meeting. Hopefully we can find some greater efficiencies down the road. Generally speaking, I'm in support of what has been said this evening. I will have to abstain my vote on anything regarding art docents and what they may be receiving, because I do have a conflict of interest with that as well.
All right. Finally, Councilmember Brzezinski?
Yes, finally.
Not fine. Well, maybe
we can go
you're
on
fine.
for a long time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to follow up on the issue of reserves. Clarify for us the fact that our reserves are actually designated for certain uses, and second of all, that that the projection, our future projection, is not going to include the same use of reserves potentially if those projections come to appropriate and positive conclusion.
Councilmember Brzezinski, I'd be happy to further discuss that. If next year at mid-year budget review, we come in and we see, as I mentioned, there was some semi-conservative estimates on the revenue side. For instance, we've budgeted our property tax at 2.5%. A 3.5% would be a 1% increase. We may be coming forward with increases at mid-year in 12-13 that could equal this amount that we're talking about. If that were the case, we would not recommend the use of the prior year carry, and that money would roll back to the capital reserve as per our policy. We do have $7.4 million in our reserve for budget stabilization, which we have not had to access. That money is still intact. It has grown over the years. It exceeds our required 25% of our general fund operating budget. It's in excess of that. I think when we look at our reserve levels amongst comparable communities, and I look at them nationwide, we're very strong. And we did set that money aside for economies that do tend to rise and fall. And so that was one of the stated purposes of that reserve, was to be able to go there. But usually, I think our intention was to use it more as a bridge with anticipation that the economy would recover, and then you could start adding back to that stabilization reserve. So has that answered your question? That
answers my question. I appreciate that. I think that's really important for us to keep that in mind, because this is why we have reserves. And there are so many communities that have violated the integrity of their reserves and found themselves in short order in great difficulty, and we have not. But I think it's really important we keep in mind the dynamic behind how we're going to use and not use reserves as we go into the future. Second thing I'd like to ask about, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Mayor, is the issue of the redevelopment agency take. This is, and I appreciate the managers, I was one of the ones who requested some overview of it. This is one of the great unknowns as far as, all of the cities in California that have had RDAs. And can you give us an overview, not of the numbers that we might actually see, but a strategy that we have that we could act on should there be additional monies that are taken by the state of California or taken by the county of Santa Clara that will show up at a certain point, let's say June 13th of next, June of next year. What is our game plan? What is our strategy at that point? Should we see this take that's unexpected?
I think the manager might want to chime in with me on this, but I think that the take that we're dealing with right now is, and the manager can correct me, we are dealing with an expected take. That at stake with the take through the dissolution of the redevelopment agency has already occurred. What we are now dealing with is how that take manifests itself in terms of we have excess balances once they've been audited that will eventually be available for redistribution to the, quote, taxing entities that shared in that original property tax. There's going to be some potential disagreement about how that pro rata allocation is made. And so we have had to make range and estimates. So I think the unexpected nature that the manager was talking about is there are certain formulas where we believe, and we have some anecdotal evidence from the legislative analyst's office that we're correct in how we would recommend that distribution be made. Our revenue estimates resulting from that formula are fairly more robust than a more an approach that would be more favorable to the county and the school districts, as an example. We are not in the driver's seat necessarily in how this all plays out, so we have to budget and forecast both ways, a pessimistic and an optimistic. And what's in the budget right now is more towards the pessimistic side. So if we are able to succeed in lessening the state or the take that occurs from the distribution, and it is more favorable to the town, that money would then be available either to go into an operating budget, but likely would go to the capital budget at some point when we collect it.
To try to make it simple, I think there'll be an operating budget impact and a capital budget impact. The operating budget impact will be the ultimate allocation of tax increment out to all the taxing entities, of which we're one, and that's the recurring annual tax increment. A couple pieces there. One, we need to protect our debt service for the bonds that the town has already issued. Second, we're trying to protect the administrative costs we incur that are allowed by state law to do the processing of those enforceable obligations. And then three, we're trying to make sure we get our fair share of the tax increment that is distributed to all tax entities. On the other side, there are one-time funding streams related to the dissolution of redevelopment, be it fund balance or properties that will then be allocated as well. We see clearly those one-time sources coming to council as part of the capital budget discussion, while the tax increment replacing really becomes an add-on to your property tax revenue and becomes an ongoing revenue in perpetuity for the town that only grows as redevelopment debt retires.
All right, thank you. I wanted just to comment that I think it behooves all of us on council with staff to pay attention to what's happening in Sacramento in relation to this, and to take a proactive stance with our legislators as the process evolves. I know we're all aware of the various issues that are in front of the legislators today that are being countered by some members of the finance office up there, and I do think it's going to take some political pressure on our part to sustain the attention of the legislators, so that we can remind them of how significant this is to us at the local level. And that would be my recommendation, is that if the staff can continue to forward us information regarding what efforts the council can make in this regard, I would certainly appreciate it.
We do believe lobbying to both the county and the state would be very, very helpful. Those seem to be the two entities that are trying to minimize resources available to the town.
Okay. Any further comments? I'll make two final comments. First of all, I'm going to endorse Councilmember McNutt's perspective on the library. While the wow factor, so to speak, is still there, I think if we can manage to add the hour on Sunday as well as keeping the hours on Saturday as they are currently, it's a tremendous community benefit, and I'd love to see us be able to do that. Lastly, I think while Mr. Conway and Ms. Harayama receive ample and well-deserved kudos for the work on this. There's a whole group of people sitting behind them who, I don't know if the camera has panned to them or not, but they and the people who work with them, as we hopefully come out of this Great Recession, have continued to provide outstanding service to our community, and we ask them to provide more with less resources, and they've done a fabulous job. And this council member wants to acknowledge and thank all of you for the efforts that you have put forth on behalf of the residents of Los Gatos. We may applaud. Does staff have enough for bringing back to us in a couple of weeks the
To summarize, the direction we're hearing by consensus is to add the Live Oak and Seniors Case Management for $20,000, to add, and I'm looking for verification, the extended Saturday and Sunday hours for $65,000. Okay. That is an $85,000 addition, which basically takes us up to about a $555,000 unfunded gap. We believe there's 500 of that through undesignated fund balance from this year. We may look at some additional revenue recognition of a minimal amount in one of those other categories to keep it a balanced budget, because we know that's in the town's interest to always adopt a balanced budget. But to recognize $50,000 in other revenue from Villa Vasona and $50,000 from governmental grants is a safe and prudent thing to do given the projections out there. And that would also provide some buffer if the council provides alternative direction on some of the fee increases that will be coming forward on June 4th as well. So we take that as your direction. That's the actionable document we'll bring back to you for June 4th unless there's council discussion otherwise.
I see none. Thank you all. Moving on to agenda item number 9, other business, approving an amendment to a contract between the Board of Administration of the California Public Employees Retirement System and the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos to add a second retirement tier for non-sworn miscellaneous employees. The staff report, I'm trying to talk slowly so she can get there. Staff report will be given by Rumi Portillo, Human Resources Director. And we can change the name tag in front of you, too.
Thank you. Under prior direction from the Town Council, staff has been working on a very lengthy and rather complex process to implement a two-tier retirement plan that would cover new employees. It would change the normal retirement age to age 60. It would reduce the pension formula and would reduce costs to the town on a long-term basis. It's necessary to adopt a resolution of intention and to introduce the ordinance in order to finalize the steps to implement this two-tier plan. So with that, we're available for questions.
Any questions? I see none. This is a public hearing. I have no cards. I don't see anybody rushing to the podium. So I'll close the public hearing and look for a motion on the resolution of intention. Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to approve the resolution of intention to add the second retirement tier for non-sworn employees and introduce the ordinance to amend the contract with CalPERS.
I'm sorry. I'm going to let's do one at a time because we're going to have the clerk read the ordinance. I probably could have done that, but I didn't. So we have a motion, a second to adopt the resolution. Any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now we have an ordinance to introduce, and Madam Clerk, would you please read the title of the proposed ordinance?
Yes, thank you. Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos authorizing an amendment to the contract between the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos and the Board of Administration of the California Public Employees Retirement System to add a second retirement tier to provide Section 21353, 2% at 60 full formula for non-sworn miscellaneous employees.
Now I'll look for a motion to introduce the ordinance. Councilmember Leonardis.
Move to adopt the ordinance that was just read by the clerk.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, those in... I'm getting a wave off. What am I getting away? Madam Attorney had a comment.
Just for clarification on that motion, was that a motion to introduce instead of adopt?
I could have sworn I heard introduce.
I'm sure I did, but just clarifying.
That is correct. Introduce.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion to introduce the ordinance? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Not quite record time, but that concludes tonight's meeting. We are adjourned.